Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Atlantic CIL podcast. And this is a very special episode for us because we have Rebecca Martin. Martin's your last name, right? Did I say it right? Want to make sure I get the name right for everybody. Uh,
Yes, that's
from
correct.
from Rutgers, who is our liaison for the Inclusive Healthy Communities grant that our Center for Independent Living and the Mental Health Association in Atlantic County were very fortunate to get from the awesome Division of Disability Services in New Jersey. Just want to do that plug in that commercial. They also have a great website. It's a great website. They're looking great. And so we're just going to talk about the Inclusive Healthy Communities grant, the idea behind this grant and what it exists to do and how it came about. So thank you so much for joining us, Rebecca.
Thank you. I'm
All right.
here to
So
be
Rebecca, let's get started. Why did they create the IHC? What is the purpose of it? Let's go to the very basics.
Sure. So the IHC Inclusive Healthy Communities Grant Program here in New Jersey started in 2021, and it was the brainchild of Perry Neron, who is the director of the New Jersey Division of Disability Services. It is inspired by the CDC grant project that they have that encourages health equity for people with disabilities, and they use an inclusive healthy communities model, which is why our grant has the name that it has. We were inspired by that model. And it's really about thinking of wellness here in New Jersey as involving lots of different facets and wanting to have equity and wellness for people with disabilities. And so this grant is to promote policy, systems, and environmental changes. So it's got a very big advocacy and systems change focus, which I think is what makes it different from a lot of the disability work that you often can find funding for in New Jersey so far outside of the
Yeah,
grant.
I totally agree with that. It's really a different approach, and I think a more inclusive and holistic approach than a lot of grants. It really thinks about kind of the whole picture. A lot of times you see grants and they're very focused on one thing, even in the disability world, maybe transportation or employment. And the great thing about the Inclusive Healthy Communities grant, the IHC grant, is that it's really focused on a lot of the different factors. Like our initiative that the center and the Mental Health Association is doing is all about civic engagement and getting people to participate more in the process, because if more people with disabilities participated in the decision-making process, our policies would look a lot different than they do right now. So, and be a lot more inclusive and a lot more beneficial to our overall community because it would be more representative. So, can we talk, what are the principles of IHC? I know it's big on equity, and I know people hear that word a lot nowadays and they get confused, and sometimes in the media I think there's kind of a lack of understanding about it. So how would you define, let's start there too. How would you define equity and how is it different than equality? How would you kind of see that? Because that's a big principle of IHC.
It is. Man, we're starting out with the easy ones.
Yes,
No, just kidding.
yes.
Um, so I think equality, when we think about equality, often we think about everybody needing to do things the same way, as if the same kind of allocation works for everybody in the same way. And we think about that, and we recognize, right, societally now that giving everybody the same thing doesn't always necessarily give people the same opportunities, right? And so equity is about adaptability and finding ways to create true and meaningful inclusion, at least within our program, right? We're targeting this true and meaningful inclusion where everybody can participate in ways that work for them, that are, rather than expecting that the same way that everybody has always done things works for everyone, in systems that haven't been designed with everyone in mind. Equity, we're asking people to change their focus and to recognize that everybody deserves to have equal access, and that might mean different approaches to how you bring people to the table.
Yeah, I always think about it. It's really about taking into account the resources people need to kind of get to that basic equality level. Like,
Mhm.
there could be a door that allows for people with disabilities to get up and open a door, but if there's no ramp, then wheelchair users can't use the door. And people could say,
Mhm.
well, it is equal access because we got the button on the door. But if there's no way to get up there, it doesn't include everybody. So I just think I know that word gets demonized sometimes in the media, but I think it's just about taking into account the reality of where people are and helping them achieve that basic level to get to equality, which is ultimately what we I think are all striving for. So I opened up with that hard question for a reason. Let's talk about Rutgers' involvement in the IHC project because that's where you come in and it's a great partnership. Talk about that. How did they get involved and what does Rutgers do?
So the Blaustein School of Planning and Public Policy is the grant administrator. So the entirety of all of the grant project, and there have been over 30 awards that have been administered since 2021. They all are administered through a team at Blaustein, and that's headed by Jean Herb and initially by Karen Alexander, now myself and Andrea Lubin. And basically, we work more directly with the grantees, and Jean will tell the story that during that first year, I was in the first year of the grant program. I was not part of the Blaustein staff. I was brought on as an independent team with the School of Social Work, where I'm a PhD student. We were brought in to work with the grantees to find out what their experiences were like being part of this program. Because as Jean started to roll out the grant project, a lot of the grantees came to her and said that it was really important that they have the opportunity to build networks and to have some opportunities for expanding skills. And so while it wasn't initially a plan for this to have like an educational component to this grant project, very quickly it became evident that that's what people wanted. And so the social work school, we did this evaluation to find out what people wanted to see. And then I came on and joined the team and helped do these webinars that you're probably familiar with, that are the Inclusive Healthy Communities training series that are available on our website, that provides different kind of skills and sort of orientation to different ways of thinking about disability and communications and things to try to. And we now offer that publicly, right, to anybody who wants to attend, because we see it as building the greater ecosystem for supporting disability inclusion throughout New Jersey. So I guess the Rutgers team now, initially we were planning to just be the administrators and sort of oversee the grant, but it's become much more of developing a community of practice and trying to build a long-term network and group of people who are moving forward. People say disability justice a lot, but we're really trying to move forward all of the conversations within New Jersey about the laws that need to change, the systems that need to expand, things that need to happen in order for people with disabilities to have more opportunities to live and in their communities and contribute in their communities in the ways they want to. And you had asked me earlier, and I didn't really answer this, but a really big core piece of this grant program that I think is really important is the upfront, ongoing, and authentic engagement of people with disabilities as thought leaders on the projects that are being funded. And I think that that's something that isn't always as centered in disability work. And I think, a lot of times some of the grantees have come to us and it's driven by their organization where maybe they haven't been disability focused, but they really want to be, right? And so a piece of that is we really encourage people to reach out and try to partner with people with disabilities as thought leaders to help guide the projects. And we have a very no gotchas kind of approach to grant management, which means that like if people want to change the direction of their projects because they realize that what the people they're partnering with actually want and need doesn't align with what they initially thought, or there's a different way to approach it, we are very open to adapting to those kinds of changes as they go through the projects.
Yeah,
So it's really about creating long-term change.
yeah, I think that's great. If an organization maybe thinks they're maybe want to reach more people with disabilities, but they're interested in applying and they have a good initiative, like you said, that no gotcha approach can be more welcoming because you want to create that change. You don't want to go, oh, you didn't do this 5 years ago. Why, no funding for you. Like that doesn't create change. All that does is keep people in their silo. Like, okay, next time I just won't admit that we're not doing it. Can you talk about the importance because of really what you said, engaging the disability community in projects like this, in this initiative, having them in leadership decision-making roles, because that's a real key principle of the Centers for Independent Living and the Mental Health Association. And it's really supposed to be peer-led and not only have people with all disabilities involved, but really, I always say, in the decision-making role. So really talk about why that's important, because some people may see that and say, what's the big deal? Why does that matter?
I mean, that it really is very true, right? And I think with the CILs, especially, it's such a good model because more than 50% of your staff is disability experiencing, right? So there's like an authenticity in that, and knowing through lived experience what works for you and what doesn't, and having community around that. And that's, been tried and true in the disability rights movement. I think so much of the work that happens in the disability field comes from like a service provision sort of lens, and a lot of the funding comes from like a medicalized lens. And because of that, often you find that in a lot of our structures that exist, there are people without disabilities providing services for people with disabilities. And while well-intentioned, we know that often there is disconnect between people's experiences of those services and whether that is authentically aligned with what they want necessarily, or what they need, right? And so when people with disabilities are in the driver's seat of these kinds of projects, there is obviously like a clearer line to getting the things that are more directly going to be helpful. Like people with lived experience, that is fundamental to get to informing, right, the work in this space. And I think, and when I talk about this, right, like two different people with lived experience, even with similar disabilities or similar, experiencing similar functional impacts, can have very different opinions. And so it's not like a one size fits all kind of thing works. But the more diverse the group of people who are both across disability type, but also across other demographic backgrounds and things, can really help inform these projects to be as wide reaching and really help as many people get what they need out of the projects as possible. So we think it's essential.
I think what you said there is great and just right on the money. I think it's just very effective that the more peer-based model, it gives you a greater understanding of what a person with a disability may be going through. It gives you a greater credibility when you're talking to people that you have some experience. I also loved what you said, and will highlight what you said because I say this all the time, even as a person with a disability, that I'm just a person with a disability. Like I can't tell even another person with cerebral palsy what I think they should be doing, or what I can give you support or assistance or maybe some suggestions, but ultimately the person who's got to make that decision is me, because there's so many factors that go into somebody's lived experience. So I think recognizing the value of it and the limits of it is just so important. And that's what I really think that the IHC initiative is about. So, and that's why it's a great program. So tell us a little bit about, because I know this program's IHG, I think it's the third year now. Are we at the third or the fourth year?
We're in the third cohort, but the grant cycles have been different lengths. The first cycle was 18 months, the second was a year, and now this third cohort is a 2-year cycle. So we're sort of approaching the 5th year, but it's the third cycle, if that makes sense.
So tell us a little bit about the awesome work you guys have funded. Just give us a quick overview. I know I'm not saying now list everybody you've ever funded, but,
Yes.
and where people can find them, because there's so many great initiatives out there and such great work that has been funded already. I really think people should know what's been done and what is being done.
Yes, definitely. So anybody who's interested in this project should definitely check out our website, which is inclusivehealthycommunities.org. And I believe that all of our previous grantees are linked there with a brief description of what their project was and then their website so that you can go and find out more. Our projects have been about a number of different topics. A lot have been about civic engagement. As you were discussing, it's so very important. And there are so many ways in which to touch this kind of work. And I think it's really gaining traction in New Jersey, which is exciting to see. We've had, access to health, because this is, healthy communities project. So that's obviously a focus. A big initiative that has come from this that I don't think anyone expected that it would grow the roots that it has been access to coastal resources, and access to nature has really taken off, and it's sort of gaining a movement within that community. Really, like, inclusion is becoming a focus even outside of the IHC programs, which has been really exciting to see. There's just been a lot of really good work. There's been work about safety and emergency preparedness. There's school arts programs. I mean, it just goes on and on.
It really does. I mean, when you look at the website, you see it. It just goes on and on. And they're really different too. That's what's interesting. Like they're in the same value system, but they're very different. Like it's like, whoa, I went to a great, inclusive park that was funded by IHC. I mean, there's just so much stuff. And we're doing civic engagement. Like we're not doing anything with making a park, but it's just, like I just want to show people that it really runs the like spectrum of things that you may not expect. So I really encourage people to look at the website. The website is great. I'm not just saying that. It's really been updated and it looks good. It's easy to use. And if you're in disability work or not in disability work, but your work touches on disability, I would really encourage you to think about applying because it is a really good I just want to compliment you guys. It's a really good system. It's really fair and reasonable, and it's really provider friendly, I would say, in terms of getting that support you need. So I would just encourage that and tell people, when do they apply? Is it every year? Should they look out for the application process?
I mean, so that's kind of a a moving target. So if, we always have to wait with funding that comes from the government to find out if things are going to continue
Yes.
to be funded. And this is not an RFP year. So it would be, again, like next year, we would know whether we were going to have another RFP. There's no reason to think that this is stopping anytime soon, but you never can be sure until you're sure, right? But definitely our website is always the place to find these things. And so there's always, as soon as there's a call for applications, it's there. And when you come to our website, there's a pop-up box to enter your email address. And if you put your email address on our listserv, then you'll get notified if another RFP is released. That would go out to you immediately.
Yeah, you guys have a great newsletter email blast where it's great information, but you're not overwhelmed by it either. It's not like every 6 seconds you get an alert about something that you've just heard about. So it's definitely worth anybody in this space or anybody interested to subscribe and to just wait. And like I said, there's somebody who went through the process. And I'm just saying this too, as a smaller organization, I want to say this too, that it's definitely work because it always is. You are asking for money to do stuff, but it is reasonable. It is reasonable. So everybody's got to look at their own organization, look at their partners too, because you guys love a good partnership and really see really what you can bring to the table. Don't count yourself out, is all I'm saying. Is if you're looking at this going, oh, I don't know if it's right for me.
It's true. It's definitely a grant project where there is the hope to give groups the opportunity to do things that it's not like only the biggest names will be funded or, and it really is, like you were saying, it really is about partnerships. Like we want to see partnerships being built across the state that will sustain long-term and help create this kind of change in the culture and in building something for the future. We want New Jersey to be the most inclusive state. So we're trying to build that system and that network of relationships that will help us get there.
Right. It's really about practicing what a lot of us preach. I know, it's a lot of times in the provider nonprofit world, you get stuck in your own silo or you're doing your own thing. And, you're like, oh, if I bring a partner, you got to work together. And maybe I like doing things my way, but there's definitely value in bringing more people to the table. And think about maybe if you're applying, maybe what you need strengthened and then look for a partner who could give you that strength.
And it's really great for us to, like, a lot of our partnerships, like we'll have a municipality that maybe has never done anything disability related, and they will partner with a disability related group, or so it's like a lot of like cross-sectoral partnerships. And I think that that can really benefit organizations in so many ways, because different groups, like you said, have different strengths in different kinds of ways. But sometimes it's not even just like a couple of nonprofits come together and work on subject matter differences, but like there can be these kind of unexpected partnerships that really build into something bigger than you would have anticipated.
Right, and it makes the grant a lot easier too. And just a practical sense, having other people to share the burden of a grant is helpful. So again, really look at it, and don't just think of your typical partners. Maybe your county, or maybe a nonprofit you haven't worked with yet. Like, just have a conversation. It's okay. It's okay. So now, Rebecca, I want to talk about, I always like to do people's origin story of how they got into the disability world. So how did you, because people always say, I always do this on the podcast because people ask me that question. And so how did you even get into disability rights, disability justice, disability services space? How did you even get here?
So I think this is every time I'm asked this, I feel like recalibrate my story, because it kind of like shifts my own understanding of my journey here. But the one thing that I think is kind of consistent is that sometimes the place you're meant to be will just keep coming to you until you acknowledge it and you start moving into that space. So I previously worked in design, and I also have a master's in design. And when I was in school, I was working on some disability related things that I wanted to design. And I had a really hard time getting my design instructors to be willing to take on, like, allow me to take that on as my capstone project. And it was really frustrating for me. And so there was sort of this beginning of percolation. And I did like a lot of background research on the kind of learning modalities that I was trying to target. And there was a lot going on there, just kind of in my mind, right? At the same time, I was just trying to make some money. I was a student. I got the opportunity to transcribe a conference that was happening for an entire weekend. I was transcribing the English translation because I was going to school in Hong Kong, and it was on the Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And so I spent like, hours and hours transcribing 20 hours of this conference, and it just blew my mind how different the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities is that the rest of the world kind of follows compared to the ADA. It's like very expanded, I think, sort of. I mean, it's definitely based on the ADA, right? But as a blueprint, but it goes beyond. It's much more of like a human rights model. And it really opened my eyes a lot about kind of how maybe the way I'd always thought that US was at the front of this, that maybe we still have a lot of growing to do.
Wow. Yeah,
So
that is a very unique experience.
it was really interesting. So I came back, I went to social work school when I came back to the US, and then I started working in disability with college students with vision impairments, and it was a really amazing experience. And and then I came back to school because I wanted to research college students with disabilities, but because there's not any research out there, and I felt that it was a subject that needed to be looked at. But my own personal story is that I have a diagnosis of ADHD, and I wasn't diagnosed till I was 26. And getting that diagnosis and supports, access to medication, all of those things like dramatically changed the course of my life. And now I have sort of an expanding understanding of my own neurodivergence, and sort of it's kind of an evolving understanding of where I fit within the disability community. And also I have a child who also is neurodivergent. So I think that so I came to disability not really realizing my own place within it until after I was already sort of passionate about the topic, which is an interesting way to get there, right?
Yes,
Um,
yes. Oh wait, I'm passionate about it in a minute. So
yeah, it's so true. And I think finally, like, for me, there's questions about, people talk about person first language versus identity first. And I struggled with identity first language for a long time, because though I had ADHD, I didn't always feel disabled by it. And I really struggled with whether it was right to call myself disabled until the pandemic. And then suddenly I was at home doing PhD school while my daughter was at home doing kindergarten in the next room. And I could no longer control my environment and it was chaos. And I suddenly realized that really, like, there were so many ways that I was like so strongly controlling my environment
Yeah.
that without the ability to control it, I really was much more disabled by what I was experiencing than I had realized. And so I think that I am still midway probably in my evolution of my disability journey personally, but I feel so privileged to be in disability spaces because what I will say is that I find that disability spaces allow us to be authentically ourselves in a way that I haven't experienced as much in other places. I appreciate the way that we in the disability community as a whole give each other grace and try to work together in a way that brings people in. And so I'm very happy to have found myself here and as part of the community, even though I didn't know that that's where I belonged when I started this journey.
Yeah, that's a great story. And your story about just recognizing the shortcomings of the Americans with Disabilities Act, which we do love because it was a great step forward. But I don't know if too many people realize it as they're typing the convention for disability rights. I think that's a very unique, hey, wait a minute, we don't have that. So, that's a great story and really shows how far we have yet to go, and that process of what I think a lot of people with disabilities can relate to, like owning your identity, because even I, who I've had cerebral palsy my whole life, so I always knew I had a disability, but probably not till I was much older was I more like, yeah, like I have a disability, and and it's really part of me. It's really part of me. Like, not that I hid it, because you can't, but that's different than, as you said, really saying, like, I'm comfortable in this space and this is a big part of me. So I just want to send a shout out to anybody with any disability or who might have a disability maybe they're not sure yet, and who's just trying to figure this out, that even people who come from different places with different experiences, like me and Rebecca, like it is a constant learning and constant, like, oh, I am comfortable here, or I am comfortable working in this space. Because, there's still a lot of stigma and barriers out there that exist. I remember, when I was looking for employment, kind of feeling like, I don't know if I want to work in the disability world because, I have a disability, or like, am I just kind of, all those things, am I fulfilling a quote unquote stereotype or something? But then I was like, no, this is where I'm comfortable and this is what I love doing. So just learning how to be yourself and knowing that it's okay. And it's okay to struggle with that is, I think, a really important message. There's I did want to, as we're wrapping up here, I did want to, because I know you know a lot about policy, and I'm not asking for like a whole policy opinion, but what are some things that the US needs, and it's a big question, really needs to work on to live up to its potential and its the values of the Americans with Disabilities Act? What are some key things that you think, if somebody made
Wow.
you put you in charge of the world for the day, or at least America?
Yeah. Well, okay. So I think for me, I think the biggest piece, if I could put one thing in place right now, is more focus on monitoring mechanisms. Like, for example, the CRPD, it requires groups like to monitor any legislation that's coming out. And I know that we have, the National Council on Disability that sort of does that, right? But I think that we should have, like, in workplaces, like employers should have a council of people who monitor policies to make sure that within that place, there's nothing that is happening that is ableist or is going to perpetuate inequality. I think that we just need like a lot of monitoring that could happen from like with people with disabilities. I also think we need a lot of reform regarding the way that compensation impacts benefits, because for example, with grantees that we work with, a lot of grantees would like to compensate people who provide opinions and guide their projects, people with disabilities. But a lot of times people who are on benefits can't receive compensation without jeopardizing their benefits. And so then like they're using their expertise in just in a voluntary capacity. And so it's kind of this like double-edged sword. You're valued for your expertise, but you don't get to be compensated for it the way somebody else would be compensated for their expertise. And so I think there needs to be more flexibility in the ways that people can earn and save money. That's another thing, to be able to save to do the things that you need to be able to make the adaptations to your. So a lot of the financial pieces, I think, really hold us back. A lot of the employment pieces. What else? I don't think there should be any penalties for getting married and your benefits. I think I have friends who have had CPS calls because their parents with disabilities, and that's the only reason, and that can be really scary. So I think there needs to be protections for that. I mean, just all around. I
Yeah,
think we
I
need
do
a lot
it.
of
You know,
protections.
we could do, and I agree with all this. We could do another, hour podcast on each topic. Yeah, and I think what you said, and I loved your first answer too, because that is the out of the box answer that I didn't even think of. That I think is a good point. That a lot of the issue with a lot of the laws that are even designed to protect people with disabilities is not really, it's tough to enforce, right? Like even the ADA, it was, you know, it's always like, you know, it's, it's like, how are you going to enforce that? Or that, they're going to come back and say this. So it becomes,
Oh, that's true.
it becomes just more difficult. And then the ADA doesn't really have the teeth that I think it was initially designed to have. So I think what you're saying about making sure the enforcement mechanisms are strong uh,
Mhm.
is really important. And I totally agree with you about that's always the answer I give your second answer, which is the benefits and earnings and how that holds people back. And it's just I always call it the contradictions within the system. It's like you'll go to one end of the disability service system and they'll be like, whatever you do, don't work. Don't work. You have all your benefits. Don't work, don't work, don't work, don't work. You'll go to the other end and they'll go, you need to be working right now. You need to be working. You need to get, and it's like, wait a minute. I don't, and like you're just sitting there like, well, I want to work, but I don't want to lose my benefits, or I want to work a little, but nobody can really tell me how that affects my benefits. So it's just not making it a lot easier for people to understand and making it a lot simpler to kind of delinking benefits from work, I think would be a
Mhm.
huge step forward and very beneficial to society. I think they'd be really surprised with the amount of more employees they have if people weren't understandably worried about losing their benefits, because sometimes you hear, well, there are programs, there are able accounts that we've learned on this podcast, and there are things you can do in Social Security, but it's very complicated. And I
Mhm.
think streamlining it would be a lot easier. And we're going to be talking to in our initiative about what you said about SSI and marriage. For those of you on the podcast who don't know, if you get married with Social Security income, that could affect your benefits. So it becomes a marriage penalty. So when we talk about marriage equality, I mean, that's a big piece of it that people don't often think about. Oh, well, I really enjoyed this conversation. This was a great conversation. I knew you would be an excellent guest. We're going to link to the DDS website and IHC in the description. If you have anything else you would like to plug, please let me know. And then I'll pass it to you. Just, anything else you would like to say or anything else you would like to point people to, here's your chance. No pressure though. I always tell people.
I just, you know, I think I want to thank you for having me on. It's been really a delight, Donald. I really appreciate it. And it's been great working with you with the grant too. And I want to say that I think that we're really fortunate that Perry Neron from DDS has really made this a priority, because it's amazing that we have this opportunity to do IHC work in New Jersey. And I think I need to give a plug to John Gattuso, who does all the media for IHC, because we've certainly talked about that a lot during our time today. And he does so much work for us on that stuff. So I needed to give him a shout out. But no, just please, everybody, if you're interested in IHC stuff, sign up for our emails. You can come and listen to the webinars that I host, which a lot of people enjoy. And you can check out all the great projects that are happening, and maybe you'll apply the next time there's an RFP. We'd love to.
That's a great way to close it. I do want to also just thank again the awesome people at Rutgers, awesome people at the Division of Disability Services in New Jersey. Perry's amazing. I know she listens. So there's just such a great team there, and I would really encourage people to really look at it. And there's a lot of support there. I know I keep highlighting this theme, but it's because I believe in this grant so much. I want people to apply and see that that there's a lot of upside to applying, and you learn a lot, and they really work with you too. So don't be scared. I know it's intimidating. I've been there, but it's a good environment to grow and to learn, and there's support on the other side. So thank you all for joining us, and until next time, I'm Donald from the Atlantic CIL, and this is my podcast. Bye, everybody.